Hawaii, Oahu, Sunday, December 7, 1941. Dawn paints the calm waters of Pearl Harbor, the heart of the United States Pacific Fleet, red. While life at the base proceeds in the Sunday quiet, a Japanese naval squadron, led by Admiral Chuichi Nagumo on the orders of Isoroku Yamamoto, advances silently under a cloud-covered sky. No one imagines that in a few hours the face of the war will change. The day will go down in history as the Day of Infamy. The attack about to unleash is not an isolated incident, but the culmination of years of tension, imperial ambitions, and economic clashes between Tokyo and Washington. A long-burning fuse that morning, is ready to explode. The December 7th attack did not arise suddenly. Its roots date back to 1931, when Japan occupied Manchuria, and deepened in 1937 with the invasion of China. Japan's expansion into East Asia sparked confrontation with the United States. President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, as early as his quarantine address of October 5, 1937, expressed his desire to restrain aggressive powers. With the Export Control Act of July 1940, Washington imposed an embargo on fuels and metals, while the Tripartite Pact of September 27 of the same year linked Tokyo to Berlin and Rome. Japan, eager for raw materials and strategic autonomy, perceived the embargo as a mortal threat. Amid fears of economic collapse and internal pressure, the idea of a preemptive war took shape in the halls of imperial power. In the summer of 1941, the Japanese leadership faced a crucial choice: abandon its Asian ambitions or risk all-out war. Oil reserves, vital to the Navy and Air Force, would last at most 2 years, and barely a year and a half in the event of conflict. The National Policy Plan, approved by Emperor Hirohito on July 2, opted for a southward push, occupying Indochina, isolating China, seizing the resources of the Dutch East Indies, and creating the so-called Greater East Asia Co-Prosperity Sphere. Liaison meetings between the military leadership and Prime Minister Fumimaro Konoe confirmed this line, while diplomats in Washington searched in vain for a compromise. Every day lost meant less fuel, time, more than an enemy, was a sentence. As military plans advanced, the governments attempted a last-ditch diplomatic approach. From the spring of 1941, Ambassador Kichiobara Nomura and, later, Special Envoy Saburo Kurisu sought an agreement in Washington with Secretary of State Cordell Hull. The negotiations revolved around increasingly weak proposals, lifting the embargo in exchange for a gradual withdrawal from China, over up to 25 years. But Roosevelt and Hull, determined to support Chiang Kai-shek and maintain the balance of power in the Pacific, refused. On October 16, Prime Minister Fumimaro Konoe resigned, replaced by General Hideki Tojo, who was closer to the war effort. On November 26, as the attack fleet set sail from Haitokapu Bay, the Hull note arrived. It demanded immediate withdrawal from China and Indochina, and the renunciation of the Tripartite Pact. For Tokyo it was an unacceptable ultimatum. The path to war was now set. Long before diplomacy failed, Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto had conceived a bold move. Inspired by the British raid on Taranto, he began planning a surprise attack on Pearl Harbor in 1940. With Rear Admiral Takejiro Onishi and naval aviation expert Minoru Genda, he planned the deployment of all the heavy aircraft carriers of the combined fleet. The idea was simple and devastating: annihilate the Pacific Fleet on the first day of the war, striking battleships and carriers with dive bombers, torpedo bombers, and torpedoes modified for shallow water. To evade detection, Yamamoto chose a long, northerly route to the remote Haitokapu Bay in the Kurile Islands, from which the squadron would depart in radio silence. If successful, that first strike would give Japan precious months to seize the resources of Southeast Asia before the United States could react. The Japanese strike force, led by Vice Admiral Chuichi Nagumo, was impressive: 6 aircraft carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, Hiryu, Shokoku, and Zuikoku, with 389 aircraft, including high-altitude bombers, dive bombers, torpedo bombers, and fighters. They were escorted by 2 battleships, 2 heavy cruisers, 9 destroyers, 3 submarines, and 8 tankers. In parallel, a squadron of submarines, including 5 midget submarines, stood ready to strike any ships that managed to escape. Opposite, The American defenses looked reassuring: 43,000 soldiers, 2 infantry divisions, modern radar, and 127 ships, 96 of which were at anchor. Admiral Husband Kimmel and General Walter Short considered a direct attack on Hawaii unlikely, convinced that any Japanese operations would strike the Philippines, Malaya, or Borneo. This underestimation of the enemy made Pearl Harbor an ideal target. On November 22, 1941, the strike force assembled in the remote bay of Haitokapu, in the Kurile Archipelago. At dawn on the 26th, in absolute radio silence, the 6 Japanese aircraft carriers set sail for the North Pacific. To avoid detection, they chose a long, frigid route, sailing north before turning southeast. On December 3, they completed their final refueling at sea, increasing speed from 13 to 25 knots. On December 2, the coded message Nitoka Yamanoboro, climb Mount Nitoka, arrived from Tokyo, confirmation that the path to war was final. Enveloped by storms and a thick blanket of clouds, the ships advanced unseen. Meanwhile, the final negotiations in Washington were fading, unaware that the military decision was now irreversible. The objective was clear: strike at dawn and annihilate the US fleet before it could react. In the hours preceding the attack, the Japanese fleet glided silently north of Hawaii. From the consulate in Honolulu, spy Takeo Yoshikawa sent reports on the position of the American ships: 8 battleships, 2 heavy cruisers, 16 destroyers, and 6 light cruisers. There was great disappointment when it was learned that the aircraft carriers Enterprise, Lexington, and Saratoga were absent. But for Admiral Chuichi Nagumo, a sailor of the old school, those battleships remained the decisive objective. At dawn on December 7, 1941, the Japanese pilots prepared themselves with solemn rites. They donned hachimaki sashes, sipped sake, and prayed before small Shinto altars. At 5 o'clock, 3 seaplanes launched from the cruisers Tone and Chikuma conducted their final reconnaissance. Shortly thereafter, the battle flag Z, the same as the victory flag at Tsushima, was raised on the ships, the signal that history was about to change forever. At 6 o'clock sharp on December 7, 1941, the first wave took off, 183 aircraft, including dive bombers, torpedo bombers, and Zero fighters. At 7:55, as the echoes of Sunday bells still rang over Pearl Harbor, the US fleet was overwhelmed. The USS Arizona exploded in a fireball after a bomb ignited its magazine, breaking in 2 and taking with it over 1,000 sailors. The battleship Oklahoma capsized, the West Virginia sank, and the California and Nevada were severely damaged. Black smoke and screams billowed over Oahu, while Japanese planes strafed Hickam, Wheeler, and Bellows air bases, destroying dozens of fighters and bombers on the ground. The surprise was total. The alarm messages sent from Washington arrived only after the disaster had occurred. The day of infamy had begun. At 7:15 a.m., the second Japanese wave took off, 170 aircraft, including dive bombers, torpedo bombers, and Zero fighters. As smoke blackened the sky, new raids struck the already burning battleships and fuel depots. The air bases at Hickam, Wheeler, and Bellows were once again devastated, hangars riddled with bullets, dozens of aircraft set ablaze before they could even take off. The disoriented US defenses responded piecemeal, few fighters managed to take off, some anti-aircraft guns fired blindly. The battleship Nevada attempted a sortie but, hit repeatedly, was forced to run aground to avoid sinking in the channel. Between 7:55 and 10 a.m., the bay became an inferno of explosions, smoke, and screams. The attack lasted less than 2 hours, but the blow to the Pacific Fleet would mark the turning point of the war. When silence returned to Pearl Harbor, the toll was dramatic. The United States suffered over 2,400 deaths, including more than 2,000 sailors, 1,247 wounded, 188 aircraft destroyed, and 150 damaged. 5 battleships were sunk, including Arizona, Oklahoma, and West Virginia, 3 were severely damaged, 2 destroyers sunk, and numerous cruisers and smaller ships were hit. The Japanese lost 29 aircraft, 5 midget submarines, and 64 men. The attack had achieved its tactical objective, crippling the Pacific Fleet. But it was not complete. The US aircraft carriers, the primary target, were not in port, and the fuel depots and arsenal remained intact, allowing for rapid reconstruction. In Washington, a few hours later, Franklin Delano Roosevelt called December 7th a day that will live in infamy and asked Congress to declare war on Japan. World War II was entering a new, decisive phase. The attack on Pearl Harbor was not only a tactical Japanese victory, but also the trigger for a global turning point. On December 8, 1941, the United States Congress declared war on Japan. 3 days later, Germany and Italy responded by declaring war on the United States, transforming a regional conflict into a truly global war. Within weeks, Tokyo occupied Hong Kong, the Philippines, Malaya, Singapore, and the Dutch East Indies, seizing oil, rubber, and tin. But the strategic goal of permanently paralyzing American power failed. The surviving aircraft carriers and intact fuel tanks enabled a rapid counteroffensive that culminated at Midway and Guadalcanal. Pearl Harbor thus became a symbol and a lesson, a tactical triumph that accelerated Japan's defeat and transformed the United States into the leader of the Allied coalition. That silent morning in Hawaii remains a fracture in 20th century history, the dawn of a new global era.